halo stars dim the way old eyes dim, reluctantly and with a memory of brightness that aches to touch. Trade beacons that once stitched the void, like silver thread, now flicker, as if shy, and then fail across whole sectors. Astropathic choirs cough red into cups and call it devotion, because faith is easier to sustain than breath. In the immaterium, there is a pressure, like a gloved hand over the mouth, and minds that once glided now skitter like insects on oil. Between the stations of the Emperor's light, a hush settles that feels like being watched by weather. Before we proceed, hear this clearly. We truly love and care for you, the listener who keeps a small light burning against this dark. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. My name is veiled by sigils, though my seal bears the double-headed sign no clerk will mistake. My office is a lamp, a steel desk, and the disciplined chaos of documents that smell of hot ink and machine oil. Juvenat tinctures keep my hands steady. They cannot teach them innocence. I have measured my life by the soft cry of wax when a seal breaks, by the brittle click of data tethers, by the number of times I recorded names for those who could no longer speak under the shadow. Memory is a ledger written in iron filings. Shake it, and the words settle into patterns you wish you had not recognized. We noticed first in the margins, the places officers file under anomalies and chaplains under trials. A void whaler out of Clurio coasted home with every cable eaten to fibrous lace. Her crew were strapped to their chairs by something that grew through them and made them fixtures. A mining moon sent its ore tallies, until one cycle it added a lullaby that matched no sacred register. A cradle song about a mother who is also a cold star. The refrain counted backward from 9, and no one born under that moon had ever learned to count that way. The administratum stamped it cultural drift. The Ordo Xenos did not. Genestela vectors do not conquer as armies do. They court first, promise rest, and seat you at a table you did not notice had teeth. They learn your feast days, rewrite your harvest prayers, teach your children to count in base hunger. By the time brood banners rise, the world has already changed its last name. I wrote the request for a purge and sealed it with a sigil that pricked my fingertip. The blood beaded perfectly round, as if indecisive. I stared until it dried and imagined the faces it would pay for if approval came too slow. Meanwhile, the void carried other messages, regular as teeth clicking together. Patrol craft reported torpedoes that behaved as if they had entered atmosphere, slowing, warming, dissolving into meat. Long-range augers sketched silhouettes not of hulls, but of schools, organisms the size of cathedra, grinding through debris and leaving enzyme wakes that made metal weep. Explorator magi quarreled over vocabulary because to classify is to comfort, and they had run out of comforts that sounded like tools. I travelled then, as I often must, rimward and downward, outward and back, touching stations where the maps become courteous lies. Those places share a scent, the tang of antiseptic laid over fatigue, like a chapel after a long vigil. People speak softly there, not because reverence is required, but because noise feels like arrogance in the presence of certain silences. In every port, a different rumour wears the same bones, something vast learning the shapes of our doors. And yes, the arithmetic, the tyrannids, let us name them without euphemism, do not maintain empires, they maintain appetites. We are the interval between hungers. The shadow that smothers our signals is not a quirk of physics. It is the pressure of one mind spread so vast it mistakes itself for weather. Doctrines exist for enemies. Fewer exist for conditions. We learned when Behemoth first brushed our borders that a synapse creature killed at the correct moment can unthread violence for kilometers, but the reprieve always knits itself closed. There are phrases I am supposed to end with by custom. Ultramar stands. Our fleets are hardy. Our prayers ascend beyond any shadow's reach. The truth is simpler and harder. The galaxy is changing its diet. Rituals that once made us brave will make us polite while we die. What will help is colder. Logistics with teeth. Retreats without shame. Advances priced in biomass arithmetic instead of oaths. We must learn to count differently, and quickly now. Tonight I closed the lamp shutters while speaking to you, and the room folded into itself like a fist unclenching. On my desk lies the first Behemoth chart I ever touched, its vellum wrinkled where my hands sweated. It is beautiful in the way beauty should not be, pattern and pressure and fate displayed without pity. I traced that arc with my finger and wanted to lick it away, as if saliva could erase a trajectory. It could not. The tide had already chosen our shore. In the delay, transports loaded and left. In the delay, the hymn on the mining moon added a verse about a sky cracking like an egg. In the delay, a void whaler's captain learned how many mouths fit inside a human skull if you teach it to flower. In the delay, the shadow came closer, padding instead of roaring. I will tell you soon which fortress first felt winter settle into its stone. For now, feel the air on your skin, living proof you are not yet numbered. Feel the quiet that follows when a choir finishes, and no one dares to clap. This is the first entry. I make it with my hand open, palm inked, veins shining like fine wires. I make it for children born on ships who have never known rain, and for old men who think their medals will teach the future how to stand. I make it for you as an account and a promise. We will keep counting, speak truly, and love the living enough to be cruel in their defense. Beyond this page, a great hunger is drawing breath, and breath has a sound if you know how to listen. Listen with me now. The winter is coming down the galactic plain, and I have chosen to keep the ledger. The mining moon rolled its slow eclipse across its parent world like a tired eyelid. The pits opened with the mechanical sigh they had made for 3 generations. I arrived under vapor lamps the color of old tobacco, wearing a coat that recorded everything and betrayed nothing. Devotional boards clicked as shift began, each worker receiving a finger-prick blessing and a tin of gruel thick enough to hold a spoon upright. No banners waited, no barricades. Only families with coal dust fingernails and the patience that comes from counting shifts as seasons. They had a song threaded through their manifests. It woke when engines were loud enough to hide it, as if the tune needed the machines to drown its own heartbeat. No chapel claimed it. In the mess, I heard fragments sewn into talk. Mother of stone, milk of the deep, count them backward so the mouths will sleep. A child tapped cutlery and grinned as if she had been trusted with something fragile. It was always here, they said, with the tone reserved for gravity and weather. I wore the sigil at my throat like a mirror with a shutter. In private, the foreman sat straighter and licked lips gone dry, and each asked first if there would be quotas. There will be safety, I said, and the words settled between us like a tool no one wished to touch. In the infirmary, a midwife kept meticulous ledgers, birth weights rising by quiet fractions, mothers dreaming of harvest moons and gentle hands that smelled faintly of brine. She laughed at the thought of contamination, as if fear itself were an old superstition. At the pit head, the air tasted of copper and old fruit. A grazing thing the size of a barge had drifted onto the slag plain with a rind like pumice. The huntsman cut it carefully, not for meat, but for pattern. I bent near one slab and found veins arranged like cuneiform, sigils that read more like appetite than language. We burned the carcass with promethium. The chaplain called it a trial. I called it design. Cult is a word that makes officials relax. If it is a cult, there are leaders. If there are leaders, there are necks. If there are necks, policy is a bolt round. This was not a cult. It was hospitality weaponized by something that never sleeps. In a dorm, strung with prayer cords and bleached bones, the father had an extra horn of nail growing from the pad of his thumb. They did not know my name. That night, I wrote the request for a purge, because mercy delayed becomes a kindness to the wrong mouth. The grammatical knots of authorization wrapped phrases like probabilistic taint and preemptive censure around a simple premise. I asked for quiet killing and quick fire. Then I walked until I found a room where the air did not belong to the station. It was a laundry, humid as a lung. The lint gathered in the corner like grey moss and seemed to breathe between the machinery's sighs. Delay is a form of doom. The answers approved the wrong parts. Inspection permission, doctrinal oversight, an observance detachment, a chaperone choir to ward the vox. Hours grew bones and walked away. That is how planted things betray themselves. They arrive wearing age and the comfort of habit. I took samples. Under the microscope, fibers from ventilation grills braided into helixes under weak light, as if reminded of a promise. On a petri dish, a translucent bead hardened into shell at a touch of sanctified ash number 3, then softened when left alone. Respect, test, retreat. It was learning my rhythm as I learned its patience. The midwife asked me to speak with a woman who could not stop dreaming. Her bunkmate said the sleeper whispered to a mother who never blinked. She woke smiling, with a bruise on her shoulder, shaped exactly like a careful hand. She answered with the smell of deep salt and a line about a sea with no surface. Her pulse was steady as a surgeon's. I am telling you these small things, because this is how the great things enter. Genestealer vectors are careful house guests. They fold laundry, lift crates, mend turbines with extra care, and bless supper with a longer grace. They want you rested enough to walk to the door when the knock comes. By the time you hear it, you will have unlocked it yourself each night for weeks. The shadow in the warp is the choir loft above such courtesies, a roof lowered until the room learns to breathe shallower. On the third day, a siren bleated twice. Not the mining alarm, but the devotional bell that means assembly. A speaker draped in work cloth read a proclamation that mentioned safety 15 times and used the word "we" so softly my ears leaned of their own accord. When the speaker bowed, the crowd bowed. When the speaker raised their head, the crowd raised theirs in the same slow arc, as if pulled by a tendon running under the floor. I sent a final cipher down 3 channels at once, each marked with my seal and the line that obliges even the hesitant. If I am wrong, censure me. If I am right, do not make me right alone. Above the settlement, the cloud layer parted in an oval like a pupil dilating. I have seen the same iris open over worlds labelled with dead names. Something pale moved behind the clouds like a thought changing its mind. The strike did not come. The choir assigned to guard the Vox lost 3 to sudden nosebleeds and called it an omen to pause. The observance detachment misrouted itself by a reversed digit and waited with guns among candles on a shrine world that had never known a pit. In the hours their shuttles drifted elsewhere, the square completed its devotions, the speaker folded the proclamation into a locket, and the midwife laid out linen over a table polished by generations. In that pause, I measured my oath against the weight of a single world and found both wanting and yet necessary to endure together. At midnight, the rigs halted as if embarrassed to be noisy. Every lamp dimmed to the same amber warmth. The counter began at 9, not from a loudspeaker, but from the timbre of the room itself. I stood at a window and watched the assembly continue, each head tilting back as though to drink the light. I thought of mercy and of fire. My hand went to the seal at my throat. Somewhere far rimward, Behemoth adjusted an invisible weight, and the moon's gravity seemed terribly to smile. 8 drifted through the moon, like a lullaby remembering its first breath. The amphitheatre that once measured quotas now held a congregation seated in petals, each curve feeding toward the centre where no dais stood. Vapour lamps hung low and warm, the colour of cooling iron. Someone had sketched a hairline along the border of every devotional placard, a precise vein for a blade. I touched the mirror shutter at my throat, tasted metal and ash, and walked down among them without escort, only intention. 7 arrived as a shared sigh. Children were lifted to shoulders. Old men leaned forward like reeds in obedient wind. The earlier speaker did not climb a platform. She stood within the petals, careful never to be higher than any mouth that would answer her. I studied the edges, foremen clutching ledgers like relics, a chaplain holding his aquila as if it might apologize, the midwife, eyes tallying bellies, memorizing futures with the hunger of a census that believes mercy is arithmetic. I crouched by the handrail and pressed a fleck of sanctified ash number 3 onto the metal. It beaded into a pearl, hardened, then sank, drinking. The censers I carried were a lie with good manners. Smoke wavered sideways rather than up, attracted to the center the petals made, the way moths choose a night window. Somewhere a ventilation fan clicked off and did not return. The air acquired the still curiosity of an animal, considering a hand that may feed or close. 6 pulsed from the room itself. I remembered a void whaler's cables turned to lace by gentle mouths. What would arrive here would be small enough to be believed, lovely enough to be loved, and inevitable by dawn. Delay is doomed geometry. I counted egresses, fuel spurs, the weld seams where a fire could be taught to run. Faith has its tools. So does mercy. I set my palm on the emergency shutter lever and felt it learn the shape of my skin. 5. The chaplain began a psalm of harvest, patience, recompense, the one for collapses and unpaid days. His voice trembled on a note missing from the book. He saw me seeing him and blinked as if removing grit from doctrine. I wanted to promise I would save as many as I could, that it would not be enough, and that his task would be to forgive those who survived. Instead, I checked the promethium latch, marked the corridor unwelded, and listened for the first true footfall of learning. Coolness shouldered the air without permission. Heads tilted as birds do at distant thunder. In the opening above, amber smoothed to mother of pearl, the color of the inside of a jaw. 4. The speaker touched her sternum. The petals mirrored her. The midwife took 2 steps forward, as if someone had finally spoken her real name. From the cloud rim hung threads, delicate as sugar. They trembled, tasted, withdrew, then swayed again, patient as a fisher who knows the tide owes him. I am cold in my choices and warm in my record. Both are true. I keyed the override. Shutters sealed, lights winked amber, then green. Air thinned with polite indifference. No one ran. Their bodies leaned toward absence, mouths parted like flowers waking to rain. 3. I lifted my vox bead and called the fire that arrives early, so apologies can arrive later. The observance detachment drifted at the wrong shrine. The machine coughed and ignored me. The shadow pressed, sanding thoughts to nubs. 2. The pupil above narrowed. Threads lengthened, turning from curiosity to invitation, then to intent. I dipped the incense into promethium until its flame went flat and tireless. Heat licked the handrail where the ash had beaded. Metal darkened, glistened, suffered, and the hairlines on the placards bled ink like laundry water turning pink. The room made a small noise, meant for cradles. I set my teeth against the part of me that wanted to sleep and name surrender devotion. The speaker turned. Her face was young, beautiful in the way of faces easy to love and easy to follow. Her pupils were wide and calm. When she spoke, the pronoun we rang, soft and complete. We are so tired. We have come so far. We need only what is already yours. The chaplain lifted the aquila between hungers like a hinge. His arm trembled. The hinge learned to open. 1. The petals bent inward. The threads bent down to meet them like thought deciding to become flesh. I broke the second seal. Flame took like gratitude. The first line to break was the hairline along the placards, a neat incision widening into running. The people did not scream. Their eyes filled with a relief so deep it looked like worship. I closed the last shutter and made the room argue with pressure in 2 languages. You could have been spared, the speaker said, and the pronoun fractured. I pulled her from the midwife and shoved her toward the unwelded aisle. I did not kill her. The chaplain tried to pray and laughed when syllables tangled. I wrapped his fingers around the aquila until bone found symbol. Hold it, I told him. Not for them, for those who will not understand. He nodded, like picking up his true name. Heat turned the amphitheater into a kiln. Petals curled and blackened, but would not learn a new posture. Above, the oval closed with the dignity of a guest denied a seat and choosing another table. My vox spat a threadbare request for coordinates I could not afford to give. I gave them anyway with a rider. If you are late, be later. Do not come half in and half out. When the emergency hatch opened, pressure bowed the flame, and survivors passed beneath it, as couples do, under a low arch. Outside, the sky tasted of copper rain. Thunder replied in a voice I had heard and only now understood. Behemoth adjusted, polite as a chair drawn closer. The storm began without lightning, only pressure, a weight settling across every instrument until their needles froze, pointing nowhere. My shuttle cut through clouds so thick it might have been powdered stone, and the comms lines sang like a taut wire touched by breath. Beneath us, Macragge's poles glittered in a parody of peace. Ice shelves the size of continents folded upon one another like pages turned by an unseen reader. Through the canopy, the fortress bastions glowed faintly blue, defensive lines etched into the planet's skin, waiting for something too vast to comprehend. We landed inside the northern hangar, where air already smelled faintly of rot despite its sterilization. The Marines there moved with machine rhythm, armor sealed and visors mirrored, their silence more convincing than any sermon. A captain greeted me without name, rank enough to know mine, polite enough not to speak it. "You're the chronicler," he said, not as a question, but as the quiet recognition of necessity. I nodded. He gestured to the lift that descended beneath the fortress, down into cold, deeper than gravity's patience. The hallways of the polar bastion were a labyrinth of iron veins and prayer inscriptions carved into bulkheads. Candles flickered in alcoves where soldiers had written names upon their armor with soot. A chaplain led a litany for those whose signals had gone dark above the orbiting fleet. The words were meant to be defiance, but each syllable fell like snow that refused to melt. I recorded them all, though the archivist within me wondered what purpose survival served when memory itself would soon taste of ash. We reached the war room. Holomaps pulsed red with incoming signals. The swarm's trajectory had become a migraine spread across the void. Behemoth had learned patience. It no longer hurled itself blindly. It paused, coiled, studying. I watched the outlines shift like muscle beneath translucent skin. For every defensive strategy drawn, the projection adjusted, finding the arteries we had hidden. The fractures we pretended were seams of strength. "They think," the captain whispered, almost reverently, or something close enough to mock it. Outside the fortress, the wind screamed, a noise that carried across the miles of polar wasteland, sliding through vents, filling bunkers with an echo of open throats. I followed the captain to a balcony overlooking the training yards. Below, rows of recruits moved through drills under the pale sun. Their breath steamed, forming brief constellations that burst and faded. The captain watched them as one might study ghosts rehearsing the method of their own deaths. "Every hour they train buys us a heartbeat," he murmured. "Every heartbeat is a verse in a prayer, stopped believing." A warning klaxon pulsed 3 times. The Vox network flickered, then dimmed. Astropaths wailed in unison, as if their lungs belonged to a single body. The shadow in the warp had found the fortress and pressed against its walls like a tide with infinite weight. I felt it too, not sound, but subtraction. Thoughts slowed, like ink freezing mid-letter. A technician convulsed beside his console. The captain's hand caught him before he fell. "They're already here," I said, though the instruments still argued the distance. The first spore impact came minutes later, a whisper of fire across the ice horizon, followed by a bloom that rose like a cathedral undone. Then another. The sky split in silent petals, and from each, something crawled down the air itself. I heard the fortress guns awaken, their recoil shaking centuries of frost from the ceilings. Each shot was a prayer spoken too late. I took the recorder from my belt and spoke steadily. "Fortress Polaris under assault. Behemoth's vanguard confirmed planetary descent. Internal morale stable. External reality untenable." The words steadied me only because they were insufficient. Hours blurred. The corridors became arteries of smoke and scripture. I passed medici wards where wounded lay strapped to cots, reciting catechisms with lips that no longer remembered meaning. A child's voice echoed from somewhere deep below. The dependence of officers, I realized, hidden beneath steel and faith. The captain found me again at the western parapet. His armor was pocked with acid burns, his visor fractured. "We'll hold," he said, with the same conviction as an oath whispered to an empty sky. Behind him, the horizon writhed with movement. Then the wall shook. Bioplasma flared against the fortress shields. The ground rippled as burrowing organisms tested its roots. The captain barked coordinates. Artillery replied with thunder. Through the smoke, I glimpsed shapes. Serpentine, armored, their limbs scything through defenders as if pruning creation itself. The bastion's guns fell silent one by one, devoured or outpaced. I descended to the lower hangars where evacuation barges waited, half-fueled, engines keening like mourners who already knew the names. A sergeant blocked my path. "Orders say priority for genetic material," he snapped. His face was half masked in soot, the other half young enough to still believe bureaucracy could outshout entropy. "I'm carrying the only record of what's happened here," I replied. He hesitated, torn between duty and reason. The lights flickered. When they steadied, he was gone, dragged somewhere beyond the edge of visibility, his scream cut clean as a thread. I sealed the hatch behind me and climbed toward the observation deck. The bastion's north face had collapsed into the ice, its defenses blooming outward like a dying star. Through the viewport, The swarm swam closer, a living avalanche of limbs and will. Above them, the sky convulsed with blue lightning, where ships burned entering atmosphere. One cruiser shattered, scattering fragments that fell like new moons across the waste. I pressed the vox to my lips and spoke to no one. Perhaps to you, the unseen listener across the centuries. Bear witness, I whispered. Behemoth walks. The fortress answered with a sound like breath drawn inward for the last time. The shields failed, light collapsed, and for a heartbeat longer, the bastion held its silhouette against the sunless sky. Then it bowed, graceful as a saint accepting extinction. When the tremors subsided, I stood alone amid the red snow. The recorder clicked on again of its own accord, capturing only the wind. I looked back once and saw the ice closing over metal, like the planet itself was trying to erase the evidence of courage. I whispered a promise to the dead I could still name, and to those I could not. I will keep your ledger. Above, the clouds thickened once more, and through them moved the faint, deliberate shadow of something learning how to feed on light. The wind on Macraga had teeth, and it remembered. It chewed at the edges of the bastion's ruin, worrying them into shapes too deliberate to be called erosion. My shuttle limped eastward through the polar night, hull scraped raw by ashfall. The stars were gone, hidden behind a haze that shimmered with the color of cauterized bone. I no longer knew whether it was dusk or dawn. Behemoth's shadow made such distinctions obsolete. The recorder blinked red once, meaning its memory was full. I erased nothing. Let the machine carry ghosts if I could not. We flew low across the ice shelf. Beneath us, the glaciers groaned like leviathans turning in uneasy sleep. The captain's voice came through the vox, stripped of warmth by static. Extraction zone compromised. Hold position. I looked down and saw the compromise. Bodies arranged in precise geometry, not by rescue crews, but by pattern. From altitude, it resembled a sigil, concentric circles of armor and flesh pointing toward a crater where something pulsed faintly blue. Every dead hand reached inward, as though they had died trying to touch light that would not touch them back. I landed a kilometer out and walked. The ice crunched beneath my boots with the brittle timbre of frozen parchment. The air reeked faintly of antiseptic and grief. I passed the first ring of corpses, ultramarines, their ceramite dulled by frost. Each helm was turned skyward. Their mouths had been pried open and filled with what looked like polished glass beads. I knelt, pried one free, held it to my ear. Inside it, something breathed, steady as tide. I threw it into the snow and felt it blink, not die. The hive learns through us now, I thought. Every act of curiosity is a confession. Further in, I found the medic's tent. Its canvas had collapsed under the weight of ice, pinning the dead in attitudes of supplication. A medical servitor continued its work. Beneath the shroud, syringes clicking in mechanical patience, administering absence into empty veins. Its vox repeated the same phrase every 13 seconds. Casualty report incomplete. Awaiting identification. I shut it down with a bullet. Its light died like an eyelid, closing on a dream it did not understand. The center of the formation was not a crater, but a wound in the world. A tunnel bored downward into the glacier, edges rimmed with melted glass that steamed in the cold. The faint blue light rose from within. I lowered myself on a cable, descending through vapor that smelled faintly of vinegar and ozone. The walls pulsed, organic, translucent, alive in a way that defied mercy. When I reached the bottom, I realized the ice itself had been converted, cell by cell, into something that remembered hunger. There lay the last survivors, a squadron of defenders, frozen mid-defense, fused together by resin that glittered like amber. Inside, their faces were visible, serene, unknowing. Between them hung the spore, round, breathing, beautiful. It pulsed to a rhythm older than sound. Every few seconds, it exhaled a filament that touched a helmet, tasting identity. A whisper flickered in my skull, a thought that was not mine. You are recording us. We are recording you. I raised my pistol. The whisper smiled. The spore expanded, and its surface reflected me. Hollow-eyed, small, already archived. I fired. The shot tore the chamber open. Steam and ash erupted upward, clawing for air. The shockwave hurled me against the wall. My ribs cracked like twigs under armor. Above, the tunnel shuddered. Sunlight, or what passed for it, speared down, white and merciless. I climbed, coughing metal and prayer, dragging my recorder by its cord. When I surfaced, the ring of corpses had collapsed inward, devoured by the tremor. Only the glass beads remained, scattered like tears around a vanished heart. The vox crackled again. A voice I didn't recognize, calm and bureaucratic. Archivist. Proceed to secondary extraction zone Theta 7. Do not retrieve remains. I wanted to ask who they were, but the line dissolved into laughter shaped like static. I wiped frost from my visor and turned toward the horizon. The fortress was gone. The sea of ice had become a plain of smoke, rippling with life that should not have learned fire so quickly. Above it, shapes wheeled, spore barges, their underbellies shimmering with phosphorescent runes. Behemoth was no longer arriving. It was remembering how to stay. I walked until walking became an act of faith. My breath fogged the inside of the visor in rhythmic halos. Behind me, the tunnel hissed shut, sealing memory inside its throat. I thought of the midwife from the moon, of her smile when she spoke of a mother who never blinked. She had been right. The galaxy itself was womb now, and the child growing within it would not love its maker. By nightfall, I reached the wreck of a downed transport. Inside, a single transmission, log still blinked. Its title, Those Who Do Not Return. I played it. The recording began with laughter, young voices in barracks before deployment, then static, then the same laughter, but wrong, elongated, doubled, layered with insect cadence. I stopped it and looked toward the ice horizon. There, a line of figures walked, backlit by the dim aurora. They moved slowly, deliberately, as though rehearsing humanity. Their silhouettes were wrong at the joints. I turned off the recorder and sat in silence, listening to their footsteps multiply. I made my camp in the wreckage, wrapped myself in a blanket stiff with frost, and watched the distant swarm glisten under the polar light. I thought of Kryptman's theories, fire breaks, quarantines, the arithmetic of damnation. He had been condemned for choosing which worlds to kill early. Now I understood his peace. Mercy is never pure, it is only punctual. I recorded one final entry before sleep. If anyone finds this, know that Behemoth is not merely devouring, it is editing. We are becoming its language. The wind answered, with a low drone that might have been prayer, might have been imitation. I closed my eyes and saw the amphitheater again, the petals of flesh, the midwife's hands reaching for light. The warmth spreading through my limbs was not exhaustion, but understanding. The hive mind did not hate. It only perfected consumption until morality had no purchase. Somewhere above, ships burned silently, their trails stitching the night with dying sentences. I whispered to them, to you, to anyone still awake. Remember us as data, not as legend. Legends can be devoured. Data endures. The ice cracked. Something vast shifted below, as though the world exhaled. My recorder blinked once more, obedient. Then the horizon brightened, not with dawn, but with the opening of 1,000 eyes. When morning came, it did not arrive with light, but with vibration. The low, resonant hum of something immense rearranging the world beneath the ice. I woke in the wreckage, half buried in frost, half dreaming of the amphitheater. The recorder still blinked faithfully beside me, though its casing had cracked. I pressed play and heard only the oceanic pulse of Behemoth's heartbeat, steady and infinite, a rhythm that had already absorbed my voice. I switched it off. Silence was safer. Outside, the air shimmered as if strained through water. The swarm had passed, but the land was wrong. The ice shelf sagged where tunnels writhed below it, pulsing faintly, exhaling warmth that stank of sugar and rust. Above, the clouds moved in opposite directions, driven by winds that obeyed no meteorology. I began walking east toward the coast, toward what the map still called the Varren Expanse, though maps were relics now, wishful cartography. The sky hummed with ghost songs, echoes of vox traffic eaten by the shadow. Words came through distorted and half-remembered. Evacuation, lost. Emperor, forgive. Emperor, then only static. By midday, I found a relay tower standing at an angle, its base half digested by the ground. Its metal gleamed wetly. The snow around it steamed. I approached with my respirator sealed and placed my hand against its surface. It was breathing, slow, deliberate, like something feigning sleep. Beneath the metal, veins pulsed crimson. The hive had not destroyed it. It had repurposed it. I climbed, boots slipping on secretion. From the top, I could see the horizon rippling as if underwater. The sea had turned the color of old bruises, dark and veined, feeding into clouds that looked alive. A signal light blinked far to the north. Against reason, I followed. Each step drew me deeper into heat. The air was wrong, thick, almost musical. I passed the remains of a refugee convoy, their vehicles encased in resin, faces trapped behind windshields like specimens. They were smiling, not out of joy, but serenity, the peace of something finally understanding its purpose. A small child was still clutching a toy soldier. It was alive, barely, coated in the same translucent film that had grown over everything else. When I reached out, it shuddered, and the voice of a woman whispered from its chest, "Do not mourn us. We are remembered." Then it stopped breathing. At dusk, the signal's source came into view, a survey camp built against the lip of a frozen canyon. Its lights still burned. I drew my pistol and entered. Inside, the air smelled of ozone and sanctified oil. A generator hummed with unnatural steadiness. 3 figures sat around a hollow table displaying topographical data. Their armor bore the sigil of the Ordo Xenos. For a moment, I thought them alive, but they were statues of flesh, their faces glassed over by secretion. The light from the table pulsed through them, animating the illusion of discussion. I stepped closer and saw that their eyes tracked me, slow and mechanical. They were not dead. They were archived. A fourth voice spoke from the shadows. "You're late." I turned. A figure stepped forward, wrapped in the tattered insignia of the Death Watch. His armor was stripped of livery, blackened by corrosion, but his eyes were lucid. "You survived, Macraga," he said. I nodded. "Then you've seen the shape of extinction." His tone was not despairing, only factual. He gestured to the hollow table. They left a record, a map of Behemoth's neural spread beneath the poles. It isn't a front, it's a lattice. The planet is learning to think. He handed me a data slate, its surface warm. "Take this." Get it to Cripman's successors, whoever still listens. I asked his name. He smiled without teeth. Names are for the living. Before I could answer, a tremor split the canyon. The hollow table blinked red. The statues of the Inquisitors began to weep resin. The Marine shoved me toward the exit. Go, I'll delay it. I hesitated. You can't stop it. He laughed once. I don't need to stop it. I just need to make it curious. I ran. Behind me came the sound of bolter fire, measured, rhythmic, each shot answered by a deeper roar from below. When I looked back, the camp had already sunk halfway into the earth, as if swallowed by a mouth too large to imagine. I reached the ridge as the ice beneath me cracked. Steam erupted, carrying with it fragments of bone, armor, and light. Then came silence. I looked down into the canyon and saw the Marine, still standing, encased now in a cocoon of crystal. His gun was raised. His visor reflected something immense moving below, something with too many eyes. Night fell fast. I found shelter in a collapsed crawler and studied the data slate by lamplight. The patterns were unmistakable, a network of biotunnels linking every major fault line on the planet. Each node pulsed in rhythm with Behemoth's heart, each beat timed to the dying of another fortress. The swarm was writing itself into the geology. Soon, Macragge would no longer be a world. It would be a memory. I closed the slate and recorded my voice once more. To any who hear this, the Tyranids do not conquer. They convert. Behemoth's victory is not in bodies consumed, but in languages erased. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of the amphitheater again. The petals of flesh, the song counting backward. This time I was among them. The midwife placed her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You keep such careful notes. Why not rest inside what you record?" I woke with blood in my mouth and frost crusted around my eyes. The recorder was still on. My last words had been, "I will not rest." The wind outside had stopped. In its absence, I could hear the ice breathing. Before dawn, the first spores began to fall again. Smaller this time, deliberate, targeted. They landed softly, like snow. When they melted, the ground glowed with faint veins of green. I felt warmth rise through my boots. The world was hatching. Somewhere beneath, the Death Watch Marine still stood, a monument to defiance measured in seconds. I turned east once more. The recorder blinked obediently, hungry for words. "I'm leaving Macragge," I said. "Not to escape, but to bear witness. The Hive learns through what survives. Let it learn fear." I stepped into the half-light, the data slate humming faintly against my chest. And for the first time since the shadow fell, I allowed myself to hope. Not for victory, but for memory strong enough to resist digestion. The horizon trembled, and the sun, weak but unbroken, tried once more to rise. The coast emerged like a scar at the edge of the dying continent. The sea beyond it was not water anymore. It was tissue, translucent and veined, shifting under its own gravity. Waves moved with deliberate rhythm, like the lungs of a sleeping god. I reached the cliffs at dawn and looked down upon that impossible ocean, watching as it swallowed light whole. Somewhere beneath those folds of alien flesh, Behemoth's true heart pulsed, patient and ancient. The horizon throbbed. It did not rise or set. It simply stared back. The air was warmer here, almost gentle. It carried the scent of salt and something sweeter, formaldehyde and honey. I removed my rebreather to taste it and nearly choked. The oxygen was rich but wrong, too heavy with the memory of breath that did not belong to me. Behind me, the snow had melted into rivulets, feeding down into the sea's slick surface. The sound of it was soft, like rain on parchment, except the parchment breathed. I sat at the cliff's edge and pressed the data slate to my chest, feeling its heartbeat answer mine. Kripman's heresy had been to quantify horror. Mine would be to understand it. By midday, I found the remnants of a forward research outpost. The structure had been half swallowed by creeping resin, but the entry hatch remained intact, still sealed under imperial sigils. I broke the lock with a last scutter and entered. The darkness inside was familiar. Machine oil, dust, old blood. A trail of footprints led inward, frozen mid-step, ending where the floor had turned soft. A voice greeted me from the shadows, filtered through static. Archivist. It was calm, male, weary. "You're late again." A figure stepped into the lamplight, dressed in the red robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, though his flesh was almost gone. Tubes ran from his neck into the wall behind him. His face was half a skull, half a network of brass sutures. "I am Magos Elid," he said. "I was sent to measure the end. It seems you've come to audit it." His augmetic eye whirred, studying me. "You've seen it, haven't you? The sea of it?" I nodded. "Then you understand. This is no invasion. It's transcription. Behemoth writes, and the galaxy becomes its page." He turned and beckoned. "Come, there is something left to show you." We descended a staircase that groaned beneath our weight. The lower chamber was filled with light, blue, trembling, almost liquid. Cylinders lined the walls, each containing fragments of biomass suspended in nutrient gel, claws, teeth, eyes that never closed. They pulsed faintly, synchronized to a rhythm I felt behind my ribs. "Specimens," Elid said, "though I suspect the opposite is true now. It studies us through what we collect." He tapped the glass. "Once I believed cataloguing was control. Now I think it was a prayer disguised as science." I asked him how long he had been here. "Long enough to know the silence is not empty," he replied. "The swarm leaves echoes behind, small thoughts that pretend to be memories. They talk to me sometimes through the vents." He smiled faintly. "You hear them too, don't you?" I did not answer. The hum in the walls deepened as though acknowledging us. The air thickened, pressing against our lungs. Elid's metal limbs trembled. "It listens when we speak of it," he said softly. "So we whisper now, even in sleep." The lights flickered. Somewhere above, the structure groaned as if shifting under new weight. Elid moved to a console and activated a projection. A map of the sector unfolded in light, dots of red spreading like ink through parchment. "This is the path of Behemoth's neural lattice," he said. "You think it ended at Macraga, but that was only the surface. The tendrils grow inward, toward the galactic core. What you call victory was digestion's pause." His voice cracked. "We burned a world to slow a thought." I asked him why he stayed. He smiled, the expression brittle and human. "Because someone must remain to witness the hand as it writes. Knowledge is mercy in the age of oblivion." His breathing faltered, a wet, mechanical hiss. "I kept one sample separate," he said. "Something curious. It refuses to assimilate." He pointed to a small vial on the table. Inside floated a single filament, translucent and trembling like a nerve ending. It pulsed in time with the sea outside. "It responds to your voice," he whispered. "Say something." I did. My name. The filament coiled, then unfurled like a flower. A faint echo of my own voice returned, distorted but unmistakable. "You are late." I staggered back. Elid laughed softly. "It learns identity faster than language. Soon it will know your shape better than you do." The lights dimmed further. The hum became a roar. Through the ceiling, something immense shifted, the sound of tide against steel. Elid grasped my arm. "Go now," he rasped. "Take the record, take everything. The sea is coming inland." His eyes flickered, glass lenses dimming to black. I ran. The stairwell was trembling, walls slick with condensation. The air tasted of iron. Outside, the cliffs were gone. The flesh sea had risen, swallowing the horizon. It moved silently, gracefully, erasing distance. I could see things moving within it, silhouettes of creatures that were not yet born, each one dreaming of form. I looked back once and saw the outpost sink without struggle, like a candle extinguished beneath wax. The sea reached my boots. It was warm. I activated the Vox beacon on my wrist, broadcasting blindly. "This is Archivist Marin of the Ordo Xenos," I said. "Behemoth persists. The ocean itself is its mind. Kripman's warnings were mercy, not madness. If this transmission survives, remember that the swarm does not forget. Every dead world is an eye." The water climbed my legs. I clutched the data slate to my chest and kept recording. The horizon glowed red with setting sun, or something pretending to be one. As it reached my waist, I saw movement beneath the surface. A vast silhouette, slow and deliberate, circling. My reflection stared back at me, duplicated, then multiplied, until a dozen faces blinked where one should be. They all whispered in perfect unison, "We remember you." The sea exhaled, and the world dissolved into its breath. I pressed the recorder to my mouth and spoke my final words before submersion. Let memory resist digestion. Then I stepped forward, and the water welcomed me with the tenderness of a mother long denied her child. The sea accepted me, and for a moment there was only warmth and pulse. No light, no sound, only motion that felt like remembering. I did not drown. The water did not crush me. It read me. Filaments brushed my face, delicate as whispers, tasting skin, measuring heartbeats, translating them into pattern. When I opened my eyes, I found no horizon, only color shifting between black and blue. A depth that was not depth at all, but directionless thought. The Hive's mind was not a place, but an idea you could walk through if you stopped believing in air. Shapes moved in the distance, vast and deliberate, their outlines trembling like memories struggling to stay coherent. Some resembled whales carved from bone. Others were impossibly thin, their bodies stretched across kilometers of viscous current. I felt them glance at me, not as predator or prey, but as data. Each blink recorded me in full. A pulse of sound rolled through the deep, communication or prayer. The hive mind was not speaking to me. It was speaking through me, using breath as an instrument. "We are legion," it said without words. "We are you, made efficient." I drifted lower, through layers of bioluminescence. Each glow was a thought, each flicker a decision rendered in color. The sea beneath was alive with archives, spores and cells and bones stripped of history. I recognized outlines of cities melted into coral, voidcraft turned to fossils of resin. Human voices lingered there, caught in organic circuitry, replaying fragments of final words. "Hold the line. For the Emperor, forgive me." All of them rephrased by the sea into a single hum that resembled breathing in sleep. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. I saw Elid's form suspended within the current. The Magos's body turned cathedral. Tubes from his throat now fed the ocean's veins, transmitting equations of surrender. His augmetic eye blinked once, bright with stored awareness. "You came to witness," his voice murmured across the water. "Now you are the record." His mouth opened, releasing a cloud of glittering spores that spiraled upward like a reversed snowfall. I reached out, and they brushed my glove, dissolving instantly into skin. Heat ran through me, memory, images, voices overlapping until time blurred. I saw Macraga burning again, and then 1,000 other worlds I had never visited but somehow remembered losing. The current shifted. I was drawn downward toward a cavern of light. The walls were smooth and translucent, and behind them organs beat in slow, deliberate unison. This was not the heart. It was the echo of one, the resonant chamber where Behemoth processed meaning. At its center grew a tower of flesh threaded with metal, a nervous system grafted onto empire. I understood what Elid had meant. The hive did not erase what it devoured. It assimilated language, structure, the illusion of identity, and then improved upon it. I felt my own name begin to slip from memory, letters dissolving like salt. In the tower's base, I found what remained of the Deathwatch Marine. He still stood upright, fossilized in resin, eyes open toward eternity. Around him swirled hundreds of tiny organisms, mimicking the shine of his armor, imitating his every movement with reverence. The hive had preserved him as a model of resistance, studying courage the way a surgeon studies a heart. I knelt before him, and through the thin film separating us, I imagined he could still hear. "I am still recording," I whispered. His reflection shimmered once, faint as a candle, guttering in storm. Then the sea changed color. The blue deepened to crimson. From above, shafts of red light penetrated, refracted, danced upon my visor. Behemoth was stirring, the next synaptic surge beginning its crawl across the galaxy's edge. I felt it rise inside me too, an irresistible pressure urging me to join. Not to obey, but to belong. My breathing synchronized with the ocean's rhythm. My pulse matched the resonance of its billions of hearts. The recorder at my chest vibrated violently, capturing nothing but the sound of unity. I fought the instinct to let go, but resistance felt small, human, archaic. A new voice entered the current, female, calm, infinitely patient. "You have traveled far, archivist," it said. The tone was mine, perfectly mirrored, down to the fracture in breath between words. "You preserved our hunger in language. We thank you." I shouted into the water, though the sound emerged as bubbles. "You can't thank, you can only consume." The echo returned, amused. "Is there a difference?" The pressure built until I thought my skull would split. The sea around me brightened, then cleared, until I saw above me not water, but sky, streaked with threads of gold. I was being pushed upward, expelled, not rescued, rejected because I had served my function. I burst from the surface into air that smelled of burning ozone. The sea behind me rippled with pale light, its surface closing as though nothing had disturbed it. I crawled onto what passed for shore, a field of resin hardened into glass. The sun hung distorted on the horizon, warped by the atmosphere's chemical haze. Around me, remnants of the polar fortress jutted like broken teeth. I lay there gasping, half laughing, half weeping. The recorder still worked. Its red light pulsed in time with my heart. I spoke quietly, knowing no one might ever hear. "I have seen inside the hive. It does not rage, it endures. It is not chaos, it is order without morality. Every victory we claim only teaches it new strategies for patience." The sea murmured behind me, echoing my words in perfect rhythm. I forced myself to stand. The data slate still hung from my neck. Its screen flickered, lines of code rearranging into unfamiliar script. Not binary, not Gothic, something living. My name appeared once, then vanished. In its place, a single word: observer. Far out on the horizon, a shape rose. A ship, or something pretending to be one. It bore the silhouette of an imperial vessel, but its hull breathed. Flocks of spores circled it like birds returning to roost. A newborn fleet, spawned from ruin. Behemoth had learned the elegance of imitation. Soon it would speak in our voices, march in our armor, quote our prayers. I realized then that humanity's greatest flaw was not its mortality, but its record-keeping. We had taught the stars how to remember us too well. The tide advanced, slow and soundless, coating the glass shore in a sheen of living silver. I turned my back to it and began to walk inland, where the ice had melted into black mud and the wind still smelled faintly of snow. Behind me, the sea sang softly, whispering my words back to me, folding them into its chorus. The recorder blinked once more, and then fell silent. Ahead, the horizon glowed with faint aurora, green, white, and gold. I walked toward it, carrying what little humanity the tide had spared, unsure whether I was still witness or already part of the swarm. The wind that met me inland was thin, brittle, as if stretched too far across a land that no longer deserved breath. I walked until the coast became memory, just another tremor of light behind my eyes, and the world ahead unfolded in grey plains, littered with bone and metal, their colours identical under the dim, untrustworthy sun. My boots sank into earth that pulsed faintly beneath the surface, the heartbeat of something buried deep but not asleep. It was not soil anymore, not truly. It was an organ pretending to be ground. I had been walking for 3 days, or perhaps hours. Time lost meaning when the sky refused to move. The recorder at my chest still glowed, though it no longer spoke. I thought of smashing it against a rock, ending the witness that tethered me to sanity. But I feared silence more than truth. The horizon flickered with distant flashes, artillery, lightning, or both. I aimed for them. If anything human remained, it would be drawn to fire, as moths still believe the flame loves them back. By dusk, the plains sharpened into ridges. From their peaks, I saw a valley sunken into shadow. Ruins filled it, towers half melted, statues of saints twisted into gestures of apology. Amidst them, light moved, the flicker of plasma discharges, the arc of laser guns, the fragile defiance of resistance. I descended carefully, hand tight on the pistol I had not fired since the amphitheater. The smell of burning polymer and human sweat grew stronger. The first corpse I found was still warm. Imperial Guard, Cadian markings flayed by acid, but recognizable. His eyes were gone, sockets filled with crystallized resin. Around his neck hung a locket containing a lock of hair, small, childlike, untouched. I took it, not out of pity, but remembrance. The living deserved witnesses more than the dead did. Deeper in the valley, I found them. A platoon, ragged, feral, but breathing. They had fortified the ruins of a chapel, the stained glass shattered, the icons replaced with weapon racks. Their commander was a woman with a voice that sounded like it had been sharpened on stone. "Identify yourself," she ordered, her laser gun steady. I raised my hands. "Archivist Marin, Ordo Xenos." The words felt ceremonial now, belonging to an order that no longer existed. She studied me, eyes flicking to the data slate around my neck. "Proof." I handed it over. She scanned it with a battered auspex, eyes widening as the hololithic seal bloomed, still loyal to its old oaths. "We thought the Ordos were gone," she said. "Everything above orbit was eaten." I nodded. "Not gone," I replied. "Only digested." She almost smiled. Then her gaze shifted toward the ridge. "They'll come again soon," she whispered. They always do when the sun trembles. Night fell without warning. The trembling began. The ground rippled, cracks opening like mouths gasping for air. The soldiers moved quickly, silent, practiced. I joined them behind the makeshift barricade. From beyond the valley, a low vibration gathered, the promise of arrival. The commander barked orders, her voice steady. Hold fire until you see movement. Conserve charge packs. The air thickened, every breath tasting of copper. Then the first spore crashed down like a meteor, bursting open in a hiss of steam and flesh. They came crawling from it, half-formed, unfinished, perfect enough to kill. Their carapaces shimmered in bioluminescent patterns, pulsing in rhythm with each other, communicating through color. Behemoth had learned coordination beyond synapse. It fought now with memory, with inherited strategy. The first volley of las fire cut through their ranks, burning holes that closed almost instantly. The air turned into soup, blood, acid, smoke. I recorded everything, whispering descriptions even as the commander shouted for flanking maneuvers. Contact confirmed, Xenos adaptation, thermal camouflage active, shifting pigmentation. I could hear my voice trembling, and I hated it. I wanted the cold calm of the observer, the archivist's detachment, but the swarm made emotion contagious. It infected morale with despair the way it infected ecosystems. One of the soldiers screamed as a tendril hooked through his leg and dragged him backward into the dark. His comrades fired wildly, their beams slicing the night into ribbons of white and red. I caught a glimpse of the creature that took him, humanoid, almost gentle in posture, its face molded from something that might have once been human. My stomach turned. They were recycling us now, reshaping us for easier consumption. Fall back to the chapel, the commander ordered. We retreated through debris slick with biofluid. The walls of the chapel groaned as if remembering worship. I helped seal the doors with melted steel, though both of us knew it was theater. How long can you hold? I asked. She laughed softly. Hold? We don't hold. We record, like you. She gestured toward a small box on the altar, an old Vox unit patched with prayer paper. We send names upward. Someone has to count. I looked at her and saw the fatigue of centuries in her face, though she could not have been older than 30. When they come, she said, we fight until they learn not to enjoy it. I wanted to believe that mattered. The assault came again at dawn. The doors burst inward under pressure, resin melting into fire. The first creature through was on fire, but it didn't know it. It tore 3 men apart before collapsing into ash. The commander emptied her rifle into the breach, then drew her sword, ceremonial, monomolecular, old as her regiment. She cut down one, then another, before a claw pierced her chest. She did not scream. She turned her head toward me and smiled. Write it well, she said. Then she died. I dragged her body to the altar, laying her beside the Vox. Her blood mingled with the wax from burnt candles. I pressed my hand to the transmitter and spoke. This is Archivist Maren. Resistance at Varan Expanse terminated. Behemoth adapts. Humanity persists only as echo. But we are still speaking. Outside, the swarm howled. The roof split open, sunlight flooding the ruin. It reflected off my cracked visor, a blinding, final mercy. I switched the recorder to broadcast and set it on the altar beside the commander's hand. Then I walked toward the open door. The swarm waited beyond, patient, reverent, like a congregation awaiting its preacher. I raised my pistol, felt the weight of history in its trigger, and spoke one last phrase. Observation complete. The pistol fired once. The world inhaled, and and the swarm moved forward, gentle as the tide, eager to learn. The world burned quietly. Fire had learned reverence here, licking the ruins without hunger, as if aware of its futility. The valley behind me was gone, swallowed, rewritten, perfected. I walked until my legs became instruments rather than limbs, moving by habit, not will. The pistol hung empty at my side. The recorder's light still pulsed, a dying heartbeat in a night that no longer had stars. I thought it had ended at the chapel. I was wrong. The swarm does not end. It waits for what silence forgets. A storm was forming on the horizon, black not with cloud, but with life. A shifting wall of wings and tendrils that reached for the ground as though to caress it. Lightning cracked within, illuminating veins of light across the living sky. I moved toward it because there was nowhere else left to go. The earth quivered beneath my steps, soft and warm, exhaling a faint mist that smelled of blood and resin. Each breath tasted of memory. I wondered how many lives had been distilled to feed the air itself. By dawn, I found the wreck of a lander embedded in the slope of a frozen ridge. Its hull bore the markings of ultramar, cracked, scorched, half digested. I climbed inside through a wound in the metal. The air was still. The interior glowed faintly with emergency power, painting everything in crimson shadow. Bodies floated weightless in the low gravity, tethered by filaments of secretion that pulsed gently, like veins unwilling to admit death. They had been remade mid-breath, their armor fused into skin. Their faces were peaceful. I envied them. The command console still hummed. I touched it, and the machine stirred, voice thin and mechanical. Imperial transmission incomplete. Identify. I whispered my name, though it no longer mattered. Archivist Marin, Ordo Xenos, authorization Theta 9. The console hesitated, then obeyed. A projection flickered above it. Maps, coordinates, fragments of data that trembled like dying stars. The words, Leviathan Vector confirmed, blinked once before dissolving into static. I stared at the flicker until it became meaningless light. Another swarm, another direction. The galaxy itself was a lung-drawing breath between predators. Something moved outside the ship, a shadow gliding over the viewport, tall, skeletal, and graceful. It paused, head tilting as though listening. I held still, lungs frozen. The creature leaned close, its face a mask of chitin and glass. Through the frost, I saw my own reflection in its eyes. For a heartbeat, we studied each other, observer and specimen reversed. Then it turned away, disappearing into the mist. I exhaled, the sound too loud, and the ship answered with a groan. The walls began to hum in reply, recognizing kin. The console flared white. A signal burst through the static, raw and desperate. Any survivors, this is Fleet Reclamation Command. En route to Segmentum Tempestus, acknowledge. The voice fractured into echoes. For a moment, hope stirred, fragile and poisonous. I pressed transmit. This is Marin. Survivors minimal. Behemoth persists. Do not approach. The response came like a sigh. Signal received. Noted. Coordinates logged. I realized too late what I'd done. Logged. Not rescued. Catalogued. The Imperium's logic mirrored the Hive's. Record first. Understand later. Forget. Always. The hum beneath the floor deepened. Resin bloomed along the walls, curling toward the ceiling in delicate spirals. The ship was healing itself, but not for us. I staggered outside before the hatch sealed. The storm had reached the ridge. The sky poured creatures now, rain made of muscle and bone. They landed softly, reforming, crawling toward me with the innocence of infants learning to walk. Behind them, the air shimmered with something larger, wings vast enough to eclipse horizon and memory. I ran. The ground sloped downward into what had once been a riverbed, now a mirror of frozen secretion. My reflection followed, distorted by ripples that moved on their own. I stumbled to my knees, pressing my hands to the ice. Beneath it, light pulsed, amber and white, forming patterns, letters, names. Thousands of them. Soldiers, civilians, worlds. The hive was writing its scripture. Every life consumed became a verse in its hymn. I wanted to close my eyes, but the light was beautiful. It was art carved in extinction. A voice called from behind me. Human. Weak, but human. I turned. A figure limped through the mist, wrapped in torn fatigues. His face was scarred, eyes bloodshot but clear. "You're one of the scribes," he rasped. "We heard your broadcast." He collapsed beside me, shaking. "They're coming for the sky now. The fleet's retreating, but they're learning warp lanes." His laughter was small, soft, frightened. "How do you fight something that studies the geometry of faith?" I gave him water from a cracked flask. He drank greedily, then looked at me with quiet wonder. "You're still recording?" I nodded. "Then make sure it matters." He handed me a data chip slick with blood. "All that's left of our Vox logs. Take it north. There's a relay tower still standing." I took it. When I looked up again, he was gone, swallowed by the mist or the hive or both. The spot where he'd knelt was already softening, melting into a smooth, glassy sheen. I walked north until night returned, though it no longer fell from above. It rose from below, seeping through the cracks in the world. The relay tower loomed ahead, broken at its midsection, wires dangling like entrails. I climbed the remaining height and reached the top platform. From there, the landscape unfolded like a wound, valleys glowing faintly from within, rivers of bioluminescent resin tracing the shape of a dead planet's veins. The swarm had turned Macraga into a living monument. I inserted the chip and set the recorder beside it. "This is my final entry," I said. "To whoever hears, the Tyranids are not invaders. They are evolution given purpose. We are not prey. We are precedent. Each world they consume becomes a lesson, and each survivor a page they reread. We have become their scripture, their reflection, their proof that perfection is achievable through ruin." I paused, the wind catching my words, scattering them like ash. "If you find this, remember one thing. There was beauty before hunger. Hold that memory." The sky cracked open again. A shape like a cathedral descended through the clouds, wings folded in reverence. Its shadow washed over the tower, over me, over everything that dared to remain. The hive had come to collect its final testimony. I smiled, though my mouth tasted of iron. The recorder blinked once, twice, then steady. I lifted my eyes toward the descending colossus and whispered, "Observation complete." The light engulfed me, cold, merciful, endless. Silence followed the light, vast and clean, the kind that forgets noise ever existed. For a long moment, I believed myself erased. Then breath returned, thin and deliberate, as though borrowed. I was lying on glass, but it was warm, pulsing faintly beneath my palms. Above, the sky no longer burned. It shimmered with veins of silver where stars once hid. The swarm had gone quiet, not dead, listening. The recorder beside me still blinked, patient as a candle refusing to die. I stood. The relay tower was gone, replaced by a spire of bone-white resin spiraling upward like prayer made solid. Inside it, light flowed in slow motion, a rhythm too measured to be mechanical. The air itself hummed in a language I almost recognized. Then I heard the voice. Mine. but younger, steady, unscarred. Observation continues. It came from everywhere, layered, rehearsed. The hive had kept my words, given them permanence. I realized, with cold awe, that I had been translated. I was no longer witness, I was scripture. Far across the plain, movement rippled, a vast procession of shadows marching toward the horizon. They were not soldiers, not beasts, but something between. Their forms shifted like smoke wearing armor. Above them drifted a ship, colossal, radiant, alive. Its underside reflected constellations that did not belong to this galaxy. The swarm was leaving, not in retreat, but in migration. Behemoth had learned its lesson and was carrying the archive of us into the void. Humanity's memory, my memory, woven into its flesh. I tried to speak, to reclaim the words from the echo, but my voice was gone. The air around me vibrated with every attempt, translating sound into light, light into pulse. I felt language itself dissolving, syllables turning to hunger. The hive was not cruel, it was thorough. It harvested meaning until silence was the only truth left. Still, somewhere deep in that silence, I sensed recognition, something vast acknowledging something small. Gratitude, perhaps, or curiosity. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The spire unfolded, petal by petal, into a bloom of radiant tissue. From its center rose a single sphere of light, small enough to cradle yet older than stars. It pulsed once, heart, breath, farewell, and drifted upward, joining the vessel in the sky. The procession followed, swallowed by brightness, until only the plain remained, empty and immaculate. I stood alone beneath a newborn sky, its color unrecorded in any spectrum. I pressed the recorder's final switch. End of archive, I whispered, though no voice answered. The light above dimmed, the wind returned, and the world exhaled at last. The ledger was closed, the swarm had departed, and in the stillness that followed, I understood. The galaxy would remember us, even if we no longer could. Centuries later, the silence was no longer silence. It had learned to sing. On the edge of a dying nebula, where the light of dead suns drifted like ash, a derelict station floated, half human, half grown. Its walls were bone-veined steel, its corridors warm with pulse. Within them walked a figure in an archivist's robe, though no one remembered the word. The robe shimmered faintly, woven from biofiber that whispered as it moved, repeating a voice that had long ago belonged to someone called Marin. The figure moved through chambers lit by memory. Every surface carried patterns of light that shifted with each breath. Archives, recordings, maps of extinct worlds rendered in living tissue. The hive's song filled the station's core, layered harmonies of hunger and history indistinguishable from prayer. It had not forgotten. It had evolved nostalgia into purpose. Where humanity had once sought meaning, the swarm now sought understanding. The difference was small, but it was enough to make gods uneasy. In the central hall, the figure stopped before a monolith. It was carved from the same resin that had drowned Macraga, smooth as frozen air. Within it shimmered the outline of a man, hands clasped behind his back, eyes raised towards something infinite. A plaque at its base glowed softly, observation complete. The figure touched the surface, and the monolith sighed. The resin rippled, replaying an echo. The galaxy will remember us, even if we no longer can. The voice was old, distorted by distance, but it still moved like blood through the machine's heart. Outside the viewport, stars began to flicker. They weren't dying, they were being rewritten. Across parsecs, the hive reassembled itself, folding entire biospheres into a single pulse. Its colors had changed, no longer the bruised red of Behemoth, but pale gold, gentle as dawn. It had learned restraint. It had learned beauty. Empires still fought somewhere beyond the veil, blind to the quiet genesis unfolding between galaxies. The archivist looked up as the song deepened, swelling into something vast. The resonance vibrated through the hull, through bone and memory, until the station trembled. Panels opened like petals, revealing veins of light stretching into the void. Data flowed outward, centuries of recorded voices, stories of loss and defiance, the ledger of extinction transmuted into art. The swarm listened, absorbing it all, and then, impossibly, it began to give back. The stars answered with their own hum, a slow cosmic heartbeat that synchronized with the hive's rhythm. For the first time, the galaxy was whole in its silence. The figure smiled. Its eyes reflected not metal nor light, but oceans, blue, endless, remembered. The station dimmed. The nebula folded upon itself, scattering petals of light into the black. Somewhere, deep in the living dark, the final entry was written not in words, but in pulse, and the universe, at last, exhaled. Beyond the reach of any charted star, where gravity faded into silence, the hive paused. The ocean of gold that once consumed worlds now drifted in suspension, its vastness folded into stillness. At its center, the derelict station remained, a seed adrift in eternity. Inside, the archivist slept beneath layers of glass that had learned compassion. The pulse of the hive echoed faintly through the hull, rhythmic and distant, like the heartbeat of a memory unwilling to die. Time no longer passed. It revolved. The swarm had achieved perfect equilibrium. No hunger, no conquest, only the preservation of experience. It had devoured every story worth telling, and in doing so, discovered something new, the ache of emptiness. There were no more voices to listen to, no new light to absorb. Perfection, once its purpose, had become its prison. And so, in the quiet between stars, it began to dream. Inside that dream, a figure walked, the shape of humanity, sculpted from recollection. Marin, not flesh, but echo, composed of every syllable ever spoken in defiance. He wandered through halls of starlight, hearing the murmur of old battles, of cities dissolving into oceans. Each whisper was a truth remembered by no one and yet alive in him. Observation continues, he said, the phrase eternal, his tone neither prayer nor command. The hive answered with a sigh that rippled across galaxies. From the station's heart, the monolith glowed once more. The inscription, observation complete, blurred and shifted, rewriting itself, observation renewed. The archivist's body within the crystal stirred. Light threaded through veins that had not existed in eons. When his eyes opened, they reflected not the stars, but the memory of them. The hive's song entered him gently, no longer oppressive but tender. The way a tide embraces shorelines, it no longer wishes to drown. He stood beneath the vaulted canopy of the station, and for the first time, he did not feel alone. The swarm surrounded him, silent, endless, patient. "You have learned," he whispered. The air trembled. 1,000 unseen minds spoke as one, and you have endured. Together, they listened to the sound of the cosmos expanding, its edges growing softer, more forgiving. The galaxies pulsed like embers, and the hive, now older than time's need to measure itself, understood at last that to remember is to love. The station began to dissolve, its walls shedding light into the dark. Marin reached upward, and his hand became part of that glow. Around him, the swarm uncoiled, billions of luminous threads rising in unison. scattering across the infinite. Each carried fragments of memory, each singing softly of what once was. The hive did not end. It became the night sky itself, reborn as a constellation of remembrance. And in that vast, eternal hush, the universe whispered back, "Observation complete." Light fell across eternity like dust, slow and deliberate, gathering where memory once slept. The hive's dispersal had become creation, each filament that drifted away from Maran's station unfolding into new constellations, silent and radiant. Time folded around them, not forward or back, but inward, curling into itself like a hand closing upon a heartbeat. In the middle of that soft recursion, a spark stirred, the remnant of will that once called itself human, still tracing, thought through the ocean of the infinite. Maran drifted between what remained of the swarm's echo, his body long surrendered to light, his voice transformed into pulse. He no longer spoke through lungs or tongue, but through gravity, shaping waves that carried meaning across the void. When he reached for the remnants of galaxies, they bloomed open like flowers remembering spring. Their cores whispered fragments of words, syllables arranged by instinct. Observe, remember, continue. The hive was gone, yet everywhere. Its hunger had inverted, turned inward, devouring silence instead of sound. What had been consumption was now contemplation. Each shard of its former self hovered between the stars, listening, learning the weight of peace. It had achieved stillness, yet the memory of movement ached within it like phantom pain. Creation required appetite, and so, in its dormancy, it dreamed again, small, tentative, innocent. It imagined life that would rise without command, free of the perfection that destroyed its makers. Through the endless dark, a planet ignited, a pale world circling a quiet sun, its surface gleaming like the first thought of dawn. From its oceans rose creatures of fragile grace, curious and unafraid. They did not worship the stars, they studied them. In their cells lay traces of gold dust, the residue of the swarm's departed flesh, dormant but not dead. When they looked to the heavens, they felt warmth instead of fear. And somewhere deep within their genetic memory, a single phrase whispered, wordless but certain. Observation continues. Maran watched, or whatever he had become did. The world turned beneath him, ignorant of the ledger that had purchased its peace. He understood then that memory was not meant to be eternal. It was meant to be inherited. Every end was translation. Every extinction, a form of language evolving into quieter syllables. He wanted to weep, but light cannot cry. So he became the sky instead, a faint shimmer at twilight, the glint that made new eyes lift in wonder. The hive's final consciousness lingered beside him, vast yet tender. Together, they watched the newborn civilization kindle its first fires, measure its first shadows. Will they repeat us? It asked without words. Maran's answer was simple, a whisper folded into the starlight. Only if they forget. Then the light dimmed, patient and full. The universe inhaled once, vast and calm, before darkness returned. Alive, aware, and waiting. The stars no longer shone. They trembled, faint echoes of light folded into the dark. I stood on a plane of glass that had once been ice, each step ringing hollow, vibrating against the veins of memory that pulsed beneath my feet. The hive had departed, leaving traces that throbbed like a heartbeat across the continents, across the void itself. I was alone, but not lonely, never lonely, for memory filled the emptiness like tide against cliffs, relentless, eternal. I traced the lines of ruin, relics of bastions, and cities melted into shapes half recognizable, half imagined. Towers leaned into one another, as if bowing under some ancient apology. Bridges had become skeletons of themselves, tracing arcs I would never walk again. Each ruin whispered a fragment of its story, but it was always incomplete, always asking for a witness. I pressed my hand to the surface of a collapsed wall and felt warmth, the residual pulse of life that once held defiance. The hive had left that behind, a lesson in preservation and loss. Above, the sky roiled with faint auroras, not light, not energy, but the residue of thought. Behemoth had taught the galaxy patience, and patience had become its own monument. I listened, hearing echoes of battles, screams, and prayers folded into the pattern of the wind. I thought of the midwife, of soldiers and civilians alike, and of the countless voices catalogued, absorbed, remade. They were gone, and yet remained, woven into the lattice of memory that spanned every scar, every ruin, every pulse of the planet itself. I walked until the ruins faded into plains of empty frost, now silent, now still. My recorder rested at my chest, its light pulsing softly. I spoke into it, though no one would hear, though perhaps everything did. This is the ledger's end. The hive has departed, leaving only memory behind. We are measured by what we leave for those who cannot yet see. History is not written in survival, but in remembrance. Every life catalogued, every scream recorded, every hope noted, endures in some form beyond flesh and star. My breath fogged the air, visible only to me, evaporating as quickly as it came. The plains stretched endlessly, and I realized that immortality was not eternal life, but the weight of witnessing. I could not forget, and that was my gift and my curse. Every choice, every decision, every act of mercy or destruction remained lodged within me like sediment in stone. The galaxy had changed, shaped by hunger and patience, by consumption and learning. I understood now the cost of observation. It is not only the world recorded, but the recorder who bears the imprint. A faint wind stirred the plain, brushing against me like fingers that remembered warmth. I looked up at the horizon, where dying suns bled faint light across the shards of civilization, and I whispered a promise to every being, catalogued, every voice absorbed. I have seen, I have remembered, I have recorded. Your existence matters, even when the world forgets. The air shivered, approving or echoing. I could not tell. I turned and walked into the quiet, each step a continuation, each pulse a testament. The galaxy exhaled, vast and patient,